The Central Criminal Court, or as it is better known, the Old Bailey, stands at the junction of Newgate Street and Old Bailey. However, the site on which it stands is notorious in the annals of London's criminal history, for here, until 1904, stood Newgate Prison, an institution which for over 700 years held the grim distinction of being one of the most feared and infamous places of incarceration in the country. Indeed, so horrific were conditions inside the prison, Newgate Jail was often referred to as London's hell on earth. In this video, we're going to take a look at the history and the various incarnations of this grim house of internment, and thanks to old photographs and illustrations, we're going to have the opportunity to peek inside a place that haunted the imaginations of Londoners for centuries, and which, according to Arthur Griffiths in the Chronicles of Newgate, published in 1894, was to many an abode of sorrow, suffering, and unspeakable woe, a kind of terrestrial inferno, to enter which was to abandon every hope. The origins of the prison stretched back to 1188, at which time part of the city's Newgate was pressed into service as a lock-up for debtors and felons. The jail later expanded across land to the south of the gate, and new dungeons along with adjoining buildings were added. But by the 15th century, the jail was in such a deplorable state and overcrowding was so bad that considerable numbers of prisoners died from jail fever and other ailments caused by the horrific conditions. In the 15th century, the prison was rebuilt with money from the will of Lord Mayor Sir Richard Whittington, and by the end of the century, 300 prisoners were housed within its grim, imposing walls. That prison was destroyed by the Great Fire of London in 1666, but it was rebuilt in 1672, although conditions inside hadn't improved by the 1750s, and in 1752 a windmill was added to its roof in an effort to provide ventilation. However, in 1769 the authorities conceded defeat, and the prison was again rebuilt to the design of George Dance, who devised a building in what was known as the architecture terrible style, a style intended to act as a visual deterrent to would-be lawbreakers, as the grimness of the exterior was meant to leave them in no doubt of the fate that awaited them should they deign to stray from the straight and narrow path. With the building nearing completion, the Gordon Riots, led by Lord George Gordon, broke out in 1780, and the rioters burnt down the almost completed jail. The prison, though, was rebuilt and finally opened in 1782, although conditions didn't improve that greatly. Indeed, one of those who succumbed to jail fever was Lord George Gordon himself, who died in his cell in the prison on the 1st of November 1793. His cell would later prove popular with sightseers and potential purchasers when it was one of the lots put up for auction prior to the demolition of the prison in 1904. By the 1790s, Newgate Prison had become even more infamous in criminal history, as in 1783 the site of London's gallows was moved from Tyburn to the large square in front of the jail, and here felons were hanged in public, their executions drawing large crowds that could number as many as 40,000 people. By 1868 it had been decided that such a gruesome public spectacle had no place in a supposedly civilised society, and on the 26th of May that year, Fenian Michael Barrett became the last man to be hanged in public outside Newgate Prison. Indeed, his was the last public execution in Britain. Thereafter, the executions took place inside the prison, initially in the chapel yard, but then inside a specially constructed shed built near the same spot. In total, 1,169 felons were executed inside and outside of Newgate Prison, and the chilling sight of their death masks was considered one of the highlights of a visit to the jail by those who managed to acquire one of the sought-after special permits that could only be issued by the Lord Mayor or a city sheriff. Visitors who ventured inside the grim walls could look forward to stepping inside the condemned cell where those who were to be executed awaited their fate. They could gawp at the flogging block which combined the pillory with the stocks, as the legs of those being punished were secured in 2 holes in the closed lid of a sort of wooden chest, while his hands were fastened in a frame to which his face was turned. And if you asked really nicely, they'd even let you try on the pinioning jacket. But the undisputed highlight of these visits was the opportunity to stand on the flagstones of Deadman's Walk, a paved passage roofed with an iron grille, hence its official name, Birdcage Walk, beneath which the bodies of the executed criminals were interred in quicklime and their initials carved on the wall. Let's be honest, an illuminating educational family outing can work wonders for little Johnny's or Jemima's school grades, and seeing Dad chained up by a prison warder before you step into an enclosed passage beneath which lie the remains of dastardly murderers wouldn't be in the least bit traumatizing. The execution shed itself was the subject of postcards that people could send to their nearest and dearest, such as this one that I recently acquired that was sent to a Miss Colwell in Brighton, and which is inscribed with the message London 1905 with love, ED or EP. I can't actually decipher the signature. I wonder what Miss Colwell thought of receiving a glimpse of the execution apparatus in the mail. Still, at least the sender didn't inscribe it Wish You Were Here. From the early 19th century, Newgate had only really been used as a holding prison for those awaiting trial at the adjacent Sessions House or Old Bailey, and in 1858 the interior of the jail was remodelled and the number of cells reduced to 168, each measuring 13 feet long by 7 feet wide. The furniture consisted of a hammock bed, which would be strung widthwise across the cell at night, and which would be folded and placed in the corner of the cell during the day, a washstand with a basin, a close pan, a folding table fixed to the wall, a stool, and slate shelves. The prison also had 8 punishment cells and 16 reception cells. In total, 123 male and 45 female prisoners could be kept at Newgate by 1888, which might sound like a large number, but which pales into almost insignificance when compared to the 800 persons of both sexes and all ages that were once accommodated therein. Newgate's closure was announced in the 1880s, but it wasn't until the early 20th century that the authorities finally called time on its grim bulk looming large over the city's landscape. On Tuesday the 6th of May 1902, 21-year-old soldier George Wolfe was the last person to be executed at the jail for the murder of Charlotte Cheeseman at Tottenham Marshes, and in July that year the Home Office returned the prison to the Corporation of London, and it was announced that the contents of the jail were to be auctioned off. The whipping block, various doors, keys and shackles went under the auctioneer's hammer, as did the execution shed and sundry other items of gruesome interest. By November, the wrecking crews had moved in, and the dismantling of the prison from the inside got underway. The demolition was completed in 1904, creating a void that was both metaphorical and physical, where one of London's most loathed institutions had stood. For the first time in centuries, those making their way along Newgate Street were afforded a splendid view of St. Paul's Cathedral through the gap. Work had soon begun on what would become the Central Criminal Court or Old Bailey, which was opened in 1907. And soon Newgate Prison was little more than a vague and distant memory. In the years leading up to its demolition, several books and quite a few newspapers featured photo essays of the interior of the prison. The following set of 6 images appeared in the book The Queen's London, published in 1897. In presenting the images, I'm just going to use the accompanying text that appeared beneath each of the photographs, as it does a far better job than I could ever hope to do of explaining exactly what it is that the viewer is looking at. So let's begin with this photograph of Newgate Prison itself. At the corner of Newgate Street and Old Bailey is the gloomy granite building which was once the chief prison in London, but is now used only for prisoners awaiting trial at the Central Criminal Court, and for those there condemned to death. The exterior of the jail is little more than 100 years old, the older jail being burnt down in the Gordon Riots of 1780. Our view is taken from Holborn Viaduct, and the dome and towers of St. Paul's loom large against the sky. In the central courtyard of Newgate Jail, at which the public are here enabled to peep, the female prisoners are exercised, and upon it their cells look out. There are 3 exercise yards, separated from each other by high walls tipped with iron spikes. The windows of some of the male prisoners' cells may be seen to the left. The gate by which one of the warders is standing is part of the old jail. The structure as it stands at present was rebuilt in 1858, and through it pass the friends of the prisoners, who are allowed to converse with their visitors in what is called the visiting box. Admittance to this courtyard is gained through the old doorway familiar to all who pass along the Old Bailey. This illustration shows the visiting box, and this one shows it when it was up for auction following the prison's closure in 1902. We then get taken inside the prison chapel, about which the book has this to say. On either side of the pulpit in the chapel of grim Newgate Jail sit the male prisoners on the low forms behind the railings, while the female prisoners occupy the gallery shown in our picture. The gallery is so contrived that the women have an uninterrupted view of the preacher from between the tall slanting boards, but cannot see their fellow prisoners of the other sex. In the corner to the right of the preacher is a box reserved for the governor of the jail, and the chief warder has a seat beneath. Between the stove and the reading desk below the pulpit is the harmonium that leads the musical part of the service. The pulpit, it will be seen, faces the communion table. Our next glimpse is of a cell in Newgate Prison. It was in 1858 that the interior of Newgate Prison was rebuilt on the single cell system. Near the window of the cell shown above are the water tank and basin, and in the right-hand corner is the bedding, neatly rolled up. On the shelf are the prisoner's Bible, prayer book, plate and mug, while in the foreground are his stool and the corner of the table. Our view of the galleries of the dismal prison in the Old Bailey is taken from the end of the second story, and all around are the cells. The jail will hold nearly 200 persons, and those detained here are either murderers awaiting execution or persons committed for trial at the Central Criminal Court. The final image of the prison takes us into the confined space of Deadman's Walk. Transpontine, which is used in the text by the way, means on the south side of the River Thames. Only murderers whose crimes have been committed in the metropolitan area north of the Thames are executed at Newgate, whither they are removed after sentence in the adjoining session house. Transpontine murderers are hanged at Wandsworth Jail unless otherwise ordered by the authorities. The graveyard at Newgate Prison is a very grim-looking burial place, which primarily serves the purpose of a passage from the jail to the Old Bailey. Those who within the precincts of the prison have paid the extreme penalty of the law are buried under the flagstones, lime being enclosed in the coffins. On the walls on either side are the initial letters of the murderers' surnames, and by this means the places of burial are recorded, though neither dates nor names are now added. The last image I want to share with you is this press clipping which I recently acquired. It is headed, "A Grim Exercise Yard." This deep and narrow, well-like yard was the place in which prisoners under sentence of death in Newgate were usually exercised. A drearier or more forbidding promenade could scarcely be imagined out of Dante's Inferno. It was quite close to the gallows, though the prisoner would not be aware of this until the morning of the execution. A corner of the gallows shed may be seen through the gap in the wall on the left. It was entered by a door immediately beneath the gas lamp. Opposite, or almost opposite, was the door, the last on the right, leading into the main hall or ward of Newgate, on the ground floor of which stood side by side the two condemned cells. The occupant of either of these had, therefore, not more than some half-dozen yards to walk on his last earthly journey. The staff on which the black flag was hoisted may be seen in the left-hand corner, just beyond the gas lamp. In closing, please allow me to shamelessly plagiarise Dickens. Newgate Prison is no more, and the world is none the worse for its loss, nor for that matter is the London skyline. The list of those who found themselves incarcerated within its imposing granite walls is a long one that includes the noble and the ignoble, the truly evil and the misplaced innocent, the famous and the long forgotten. Newgate Jail was no respecter of birthright, gender, age, or rank. It cared not whether those who came within its fetid confines were innocent or guilty. And thus, as we end our sojourn through the grim past of one of London's most notorious institutions, we shake the dust of its history from the shoes of our imaginations and leave London's hell on earth to its memories and its shadows. Sweet dreams.